So thank you, Dave, for joining us from the UK. Really appreciate your time. Obviously, we've just heard your keynote, which was fantastic. Thank you for that. And I'd really just like to ask you a few questions as well around your presentation. So the first question is, what does food waste really represent to you? And as a multinational at, Tesco, when your time was there, what did it mean to the organisation there?
Well, Mark, it's a really good question. I think it's both. I think I'd answer by saying it's both a tragedy and a massive opportunity. I hadn't worked in retail until 6 years ago when I joined Tesco, but I had worked around the world in places for Unilever, where food was scarce. And I saw in the retail model at the end of the day, despite everybody's best efforts, matching supply and demand everywhere, every day, nigh on impossible. And therefore, the redistribution of that waste to, at that time, energy recovery and animal feed felt like a devastation to me personally. But then through working both in Tesco and then later with 12.3, you see the massive opportunity. Now, as I said in the keynote, the idea that we waste 1/3 of the food that's produced globally is a tragedy, but there is an opportunity. And I think the opportunity to either avoid it in the first place, which would be great, redistribute it if you can't avoid it, is both a sort of moral, ethical, right thing to do, but it's also an opportunity commercially. And I think some people think that maybe we're talking charity here. No, it's actually very, very, very good business to avoid waste. And especially for the retailers in your audience who are used to very thin margins, actually the commercial imperative here is one that's also attractive. So the WRI model that we produce for 12.3 shows that for every dollar you invest in reducing food waste, there's a $14 payback. So whether you want to do this from an environmental point of view or a moral or an ethical point of view, or indeed a commercial point of view, there's an opportunity here.
Yeah, that's great. Thanks, Dave. So, I mean, Tesco's latest figures I know came out, and you have achieved a halving of food waste in the company. Can you just talk us through some of the sort of things that really moved the dial for you at Tesco?
I think look, it is a great achievement, and I'm really thankful to my colleagues in Tesco for doing it, because whilst people like me talk about it, actually in the UK, there are 300,000 people working for Tesco, and everybody needs to buy in. And the thing, you and I have talked about this before, actually, when you point to the problem and then you start to build solutions, the engagement of people is phenomenal. I've never met anybody who didn't want to do something about food waste if you can point to a way of practically doing something. So I think the biggest single achievement was actually getting all the organization to point to it, recognize it, and then measure it, right? As I said in the introduction, I think one of the things that 12.3 did was set a very simple framework. We know what the target is. You've got to measure it. Once you measure it, you can start acting. I know you've done a lot of good work in Australia that allows you to do exactly that. But in Tesco, that was the breakout. Getting to a place where we understood where every item, product form, what happened to it, actually opened up everybody to apply themselves. So with our suppliers, all the way through the supply chain, in our own business, in stores, but then also getting our colleagues to be part of that redistribution effort. So Food Cloud is our partner here. The ability to donate surplus food to local charities, there are 7,000 community projects that are supported, really builds engagement. So there's a bit of technology, very much about measurement, but a huge amount of sort of colleague engagement that really did shift the needle in terms of both the awareness of, but also the measurement of food waste within the Tesco business.
That's great. Thanks, Dave. So, I mean, you've mentioned 12.3 there, and obviously you shared that for quite a while. What do you sort of characterize? What do you think are your best achievements there?
Oh, good Lord. Look, I think it's very unusual for me. I'd never been involved in the UN before. For those who are not familiar, it's worth saying Champions is a group of volunteers who came together, has a secretariat in the World Resource Institute, about how do you actually deliver that sustainable development goal of halving food loss and waste by 2030. I suppose the big achievement was actually creating that group, getting a coalition of the willing, and therefore getting the right representation. So we set about trying to get people who understood the food supply chain in every element of it, so that actually we could debate with real content the whole thing. But then setting a framework. I think what the Institute did very well was this, as I say, Target Measure Act, a methodology to measure that could be shared, getting everybody, including Tesco. We were measuring in a slightly different way beforehand, but in order to get everybody on the same page, we changed what we did in Tesco to align. And therefore, because once you measure, when everybody measures the same, so much easier to share learnings, so much, you know, from your time in RAP and other places, if you can get that alignment, then you share. So I think Target Measure Act is a good format. I think the work that's been done at a governmental level, by far and away, by the way, the hardest bit, getting governments to engage, much more difficult than getting companies to engage in my experience. So, but some good progress, right? So if I look at the Indonesian Chinese PPP, really pleased with that. If I look at the African nations coming together as one and saying, actually, what do we do? Their issue is farm losses, but actually translating learnings from Europe, from America into the agricultural base in Africa, fantastic way of transferring knowledge. Look, I'm not sure that 12.3 can claim success for this, but all the lobbying of the Chinese government, and now you see the Clean Plate Initiative, actually the awareness has been raised from a governmental level. And if we can get them to understand that 8% of greenhouse gas emissions could go into their climate commitments, then actually I think the engagement could be and should be higher. I think the companies bit is probably the bit that I'm most proud of. I think there's a definite benefit in running a large retailer and being 12.3, because you can sort of get on and try and do, and then go back and demonstrate that it is possible to do, because I think there's a tendency for us all to talk about what the challenges are rather than sort of actually what the achievements can be. So the initiative, which is now 10, 20, 30, which is, so based on, in fairness, based on the Tesco model, which is the 10 largest global retailers coming together, working with their 20 largest suppliers, a model that we used in Tesco, to reduce by 50% by 2030. So we're now at a place where it's not 10 of the global retailers. I think the top 15 have signed up. The number of, so that is, here's a model. We all measure it the same way. It works. Now replicate it. So the idea that, you know, Walmart, Tesco, Carrefour, and others are standing up saying, actually, we're all going to do this together in the same way. You know, that's real momentum that's there. And I know the work that you're doing in Australia with Woolies and others is moving in a similar direction. So I'm really pleased about that. The fact that there's something that everybody can refer to. There's some really good work that's gone on with farmers and the supply chain. Started a little bit later, so that's growing. And that also now starts to include food service, which is a big opportunity. And then I think finally, it would be wrong of me not to mention the financial part of it. I never thought when we started 12.3 that we'd be talking about a 2 billion bond that Rabobank brought to the market, which is all focused on supporting initiatives in food loss and waste. So I think 12.3, it's 4 years old as a champions group, can look back and say, actually quite a lot of achievements. I think we'd all say there's so much more to be done, but I think to your question, there's also some things you can look back at and say, actually, you know, we left it better than we found it.
That's fantastic. Thanks, Dave. And yeah, I really get the 10 by 20 by 30 model. It's so powerful. It means you've got shared suppliers, there's added momentum, you just go faster and further. That's a fantastic way of looking at it. So I want to ask you a big question now. Where do you think we'll be in 2030? Will we have hit target 12.3? And what are you mentioned some of the things you think will move the dial already in terms of corporate engagement, collaboration, and so on. Is there anything else you'd like to mention in that sort of landscape?
Well, look, it is a great question, and dare I say, it's also the most important question. I think I come at it from a fundamentally optimistic point of view. So am I sitting here thinking this is something we don't know how to do? No, I'm not. We do know how to do it, right? We definitely know how to do it. The question is, do we want to do it? And so look, let me take the UK, if I may. I touched on it a little bit in the keynote, but it is interesting. The UK, your old place, RAP, their report this last year said that by 2020, the UK as a country had reduced its food loss and waste by 27%. right? So by 2020, we got to 27%. We want to get to 50% by 2030. So we're more than halfway complete in half the time. So it can be done, right? It can be done. Now, the issue, I think, is, can you get business, retail, agriculture, food service to engage? If you get them to engage, the tools are there, right? The one thing I think I can say based on 12.3, and you would know this personally, Mark, is we can no longer say the tools aren't there, because the tools are there. If you're a retailer, they're there. If you're a supplier, you're there. If you're a farmer, you're there. If you're a food service person, they're increasingly there, right? So actually now it's about will, right? Do you want to, right? So I think from a company's point of view, all the tools are there, and I do believe we can mobilize. So I actually think 10, 20, 30, some of the food, I think we'll see that massively start to deliver. The big challenge is government, right? And getting governments to really engage. And I think, you know, we used to say in 12.3, our biggest questions were, how would we get China to engage? How do we get India to engage in a place where food poverty is still a very, very real issue? And how do you get North America to truly engage? And if you can get those three to engage, you can move the dial globally. China, long time coming, but now very big initiative. India, USA, actually, there's some good work in the USA, but it's not governmental. So my biggest challenge would be government. And that's why I think, you know, you would have seen me talk before, and I talked with the UK government about why food loss and waste is not in their climate commitment, right? So COP26 is here in the UK next year, so is the G7. One of the things behind the scenes is actually, how do you, in terms of your net zero commitments, in terms of all the climate change agreements you've got, why isn't food waste in there? If food waste, loss and waste globally is 8% of greenhouse gases, then together there's got to be a very good reason for doing that. So government engagement, you know, if I may, it sounds like the Australian government is being very supportive to what it is you're trying to do. That, unfortunately, that's not yet everywhere around the world. And if I could change one thing, it probably would be that. But there are enough examples that it can be done. The tools are there. People, citizens, when you explain it to them, engage with it. We now just need to bring the politicians with us a little bit.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, no, that's great. That's a really good answer as well, Dave. So you've been at the helm of Tesco for 6.5 years. You've been at the helm of Champions 12.3 for 4. What's next for you?
Oh, good Lord. So look, I finished with Tesco in October. I, from a professional point of view, want to sort of take a little bit of a break and reflect. There are some things which are really important to me that I wanted to spend more time on. So I applied for and was lucky enough to become chair of the trustees for the World Wildlife Fund here in the UK. So I'm now the chairman of trustees there. The whole sort of conservation environmental agenda is important to me. So I want to see if I can make a contribution a bit broader. I'm realizing there's an awful lot I need to learn. There are some very, very capable people, but that's a passion and a commitment. I'm doing some other not-for-profit things as well in the UK around academic research and helping entrepreneurs set up businesses. And that's keeping me busy, and I'm listening to people about what it is I might do next, but no decisions yet. And the idea is to take a little bit of time and a little bit of a break to reflect on and think about where it is I might make a contribution later. But definitely not retiring, but just thinking about what I might do next, Mark.
Yeah, sometimes it's worth stepping back and thinking about the next steps.
Yeah, never done it before, so it's the first time. This is the first time of not working in my life, and it's pretty strange, I have to tell you.
Well, thank you so much for spending some time with us, Dave. Really appreciate
It's my pleasure
for us and this interview. So thank you very much.
No, thank you very much for inviting me, and good luck.
Thanks.